These 8 squares are the most powerful things on your DJ controller. They aren't just for setting hot cues. Performance pads can help you take your transitions to the next level, help you prepare tracks faster, and even help you create music on the fly. But out of the box, they can be limited. The good news is, Rekordbox lets you completely personalize these pads to make them work how you want. I'm going to show you a few ways to use them to their full potential. If you have a Pioneer controller, it's likely you'll have an FX section on the mixer. This has a load of powerful onboard effects you can apply to your mixes like transforms or echoes, but it can be a bit fiddly to use. If you only use 1 or 2 effects on it regularly, it can be easier to map those effects to the performance pads instead. In Rekordbox under the deck player, you should see this little drop down here. By default, that's normally showing the hot cue, but if you click on it, you'll be able to select pad effects. What you'll now see is a list of all the effects that are assigned to the pads on your decks. Top left maps to pad 1, then pad 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But did you know you can completely customize what effects are mapped to these pads? To do this, click on the small cog icon here. You'll then see some options come up which allow you to change both the effect and the parameter. For example, on pad 1 here, I've got a half beat roll. I can change the parameter for that to be a quarter. I can also change the effect itself. There's a whole load of different things to choose from here, so have a little play around. Rekordbox has some built-in effects called release effects. These are effects that give you creative ways to transition out of a track. They're particularly useful for jumping between BPMs or transitioning into the breakdown or drop of another track. By default, the release effects are activated by holding down Shift and pressing the release effect button on the mixer. The 3 main release effects are echo, backspin, and vinyl break. By the way, if you want to change what that release effects button maps to, you can do that in Rekordbox. Head up to the FX button here, click on it. In the middle, you'll see this drop down here. You can choose either vinyl break, echo, or backspin. Should we remap this shiz to the performance pads? Yeah. Personally, I like to use the last couple of pads for release effects. That's just because in my brain, it helps me remember that it's for the end of a track. Click on the last pad here, which is currently a crush effect. Go to release effects, and we're going to change that to an echo. I like to set this to a 1 beat echo, but you can set it to whatever you want. One thing to note is these mappings do not carry across between decks. So if you want to have the same setup on deck 2, you'll need to head over there and do the same things. So select pad effects, click the cog, and map it to how you want it. Pads can also be used to massively speed up track preparation time. As part of my process, I normally set a hot cue on the drop and then one more 64 beats before it. I often do this while I'm actually DJing, meaning I need to do it really fast. Out of the box, this would mean finding the drop, setting a hot cue, going to beat jump mode, jumping back 64 beats, going back to the hot cue mode, and then setting another hot cue. As I rarely use more than 4 hot cues, I wanted to have quick access to both cues and the beat jump function in the same place on the controller. I'm going to show you how to remap the beat jump function to have the first 4 hot cues at the top and then some beat jump controls along the bottom 4 pads. That means you can do an entire track preparation workflow on one set of pads. With your controller plugged in, this pad icon here should become activated. Click on that. You'll then see the pad editor mode. This lets you see and control all the mappings to the performance pads on your controller. At the top, you'll see 2 tabs, Assign 1, which is for deck 1, and Assign 2, which is for deck 2. There are then 8 drop downs. The first 4 relate to the standard performance pad functions you've got on your decks. The bottom 4 relate to those same functions when you hold down Shift, so the secondary performance pad modes. Underneath that, you've then got 16 boxes. The first 8 are the normal pads you see when you activate that function, and the bottom 8 are the ones you see when you click the page button on your controller. Any changes you make on deck 1, you'll also have to do on deck 2 if you want them to function in the same way. What I want to do now is customize the beat jump function so that when I activate it, I've got my first set of 4 hot cues along the top and then some beat jump controls along the bottom 4 set of pads. To customize this, I need to select one of the user options. Because I've already done this before, I'm going to select user 2, but you can use whichever one you want. You'll now see that we've got little drop downs on these pads here. On the top row, that's already set up how I want it to capture the first 4 hot cues. What I want to change is the bottom 4 pads. I want that to be my beat jump controls. To change those, I just click on the drop down, head over to beat jump. I'm going to make the first one jump backwards 64 beats, and the next one jump forwards 64 beats. I'm then going to do the same but for 8 beats on the final 2 pads. For consistency, I want the same thing to happen on deck 2. So let's head over there and remap the beat jump function on there as well. As you can see, I've got 4 hot cues set already. Now, when I go into my beat jump section, I've still got access to those, but I've also got my beat jump controls along the bottom. When I have a new track, now all I need to do is find the drop, set my first hot cue, and then use the beat jump controls to set all the other ones. Done. One of the best things about Serato is its beat slicer. It allows you to cut and rearrange tracks to create your own VIP remixes on the fly. But did you know Rekordbox actually has this mode as well? It's just a bit hidden. Not all controllers have a dedicated button for it, like the DDJ1000 I'm using here. That means in order to use it, we need to remap one of the existing pad functions. You know the drill now. Connect up your controller and head back into the pad editor. Click on the drop down of the function you want to remap. I'm going to do this on Pad Effects too because I never use it. Change it over to Slicer. The defaults it sets here for Slicer are fine to get started with, so we can simply exit the pad editor. The beat slicer takes the number of beats you've defined, cuts it up into slices, and then assigns each of those slices to one of the performance pads. This lets you swap around beats and change the rhythm of a track on the fly. There are 2 main modes for the slicer: loop mode and standard mode. Standard mode works a bit like slip mode in that the track will continue playing along regardless of what you're doing with the slicer. Loop mode means as soon as you activate it, it will set a loop on the track which you can define the length of. There are 2 ways to activate loop mode. By default you have to use the page forward button here. You can also do it in Rekordbox by clicking this little loop icon. Using Rekordbox, you can also set the length of the section you want the slicer to chop up. By default it's set to 8, but you can shorten that to 4, 2, whatever you want. I'm going to leave it on 8 for now. The final option lets you define how much of that slice is played when you tap the pad. If it's set to 1, it will just play the entire slice. If however we reduce that to half, you can see that the sound gets shortened. Once we've got slicer mode activated, you'll see that the pads follow along with each slice. It definitely works better on some tracks than others. Everyone DJs differently, so it's important to personalize your gear to how you like to mix. The same applies to your music library. That's why you should watch this video next, where I teach you about Rekordbox's My Tag feature. This is a feature that lets you tag your music in any way you want, which makes it extremely personalized and also really powerful.